But let's go to the main issue. I'll go to my panel right now, and I want to, what's your take on this, of the killing of this American citizen who, can I deny on public access, on live TV, that he was a terrorist? Let's assume he was a terrorist. Let's assume he was the most evil person in the world. But does the United States have a right to go kill American citizens? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I think one of the very important facets is that even the Nazis at Nuremberg, guys, even Eichmann, who was one of the leaders of the final solution, was entitled to a trial. And the very notion that you can go anywhere around the world and assassinate somebody at will on the assumption, because every news article that I have read from Al Jazeera to the BBC to CNN and even Fox says that the alleged leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the alleged spiritual guide. And so, I mean, and then you bring up the idea that we're not only assassinating people around the world without a trial, we're assassinating Americans. And yeah, maybe he was a terrorist, maybe he was the most evil man in the world, but without a trial, I mean, that means they can hit any American in the US or outside on the assumption that you may possibly be involved with a terrorist organization.
So what you're saying, let me get this straight. What you're saying is that even if we had Hitler and we got Hitler or all of Hitler's boys like Eichmann, that they brought those evil people to trial, whereas today there's no trials, we just kill them. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I mean, even the Japanese war criminals, Tomoyuki Yamashita was entitled, the Tiger of Malaysia, as he was known, was entitled to a trial. General Tojo, the leader of the Japanese junta that ran the empire, was entitled to a trial. All of them received a fair trial, which evidence was presented. They had a defense, they had a lawyer, and they were found guilty and then executed on that.
Yeah, but somebody might say that, you know, what they did with Osama bin Laden, that, you know, they killed Osama bin Laden. I say allegedly, you know, I believe what people tell me. I believe what I read in the paper. Ultimately,
No, you don't, Rob.
I didn't see. Listen. Listen, I believe absolutely everything our government says. Why should you question it? But the point of it is that, okay, here's the argument, to play devil's advocate. If you have a trial, then you just create a lot of noise for all these terrorists that are trying to attack America and destroy our way of life.
Well, I mean, one could argue that, you know, it's going to give publicity to the terrorists. But you know what? In the end, we want to have the moral high ground. I mean, presumably, we argue that we are a civilized society and that what the terrorists want is they want to destroy Western civilization. Well, you know, if we start behaving like terrorists and assassinating people around the world, you know, without a trial, we kind of lose the moral high ground. At that point, the terrorists go from being our enemies to our teachers.
You're saying that we should set an example of people who abide by law in the world, even if we're being attacked. Now, what about the 3 a.m. call that they ask all the presidential candidates? Well, if you got a call at 3 a.m., would you refuse to torture or kill these people? Just to be a bleeding heart liberal and protect those values of being nice to your neighbor? What about that?
It's a completely absurd accusation. They always ask presidential candidates that, but never, ever in human history has there been that moment where we have 30 minutes, we know where the bomb is, we know. And in fact, it's been proven that under torture, Major Sherwood Moran, a Marine Corps officer during World War II, he was part of a study. He was an interrogator, and he had lived in Japan, and he had taught, he was a missionary in Japan. He knew the language and the culture fluently, and he interrogated through empathy rather than torture. And they found that the results he received through his interrogation methods of empathy versus torture was far more successful. They found under torture, you would say whatever would get you out of being hurt.
Well, Gus, you have something to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, look, the situation you're talking about was made popular by the show 24, which starred Kiefer Sutherland, right? And as soon as that show became popular, where it was that ticking time bomb scenario, all of a sudden I started to hear that scenario pushed forward in the media, talking about the need for torture, waterboarding, making these things necessary and justified in order to save millions of people in downtown LA or New York City. Now, obviously, those situations never have occurred, but the government would like us to believe that they're stopping these situations all the time. And now, without the rule of law, we have no moral high ground, as March was saying. But you have to look at the reason why people may dislike us and our methods. Could it be that we just favor extrajudicial killings without any trial? Could it be that we like to waterboard people and take them away to black sites where no one ever knows where they go and they just disappear into a black hole, never to be seen again?
Yeah, but those are bad people that America.
They might be bad people, but Anwar al-Awlaki has been reported dead by assassination 6 times already. This is the 6th time he's been reported dead. Yeah, and each time it has to be retracted. Except that no one ever knows that there's a retraction because no one can spell the guy's name. So it doesn't matter. They think that the guy's been killed. Again, it's a different guy. Yay for America. But it doesn't matter.
They could say it every time. And by the way, if you have any, the Federal Reserve is not really federal, and I don't know if it's a reserve either, but it certainly is making a lot of noise, and some people say it's a total failure. Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul would like to have more disclosure and transparency. And to their credit, 12,000 pages have been released indicating that the Federal Reserve supported Gaddafi, bailed out European banks, usually trades that faced Goldman Sachs and Goldman Sachs swaps, OTC derivative trades. But what's the story? Federal Reserve. Is it going to be under the Treasury, and what impact is that going to have?
We're talking about Dennis Kucinich. Congressman Kucinich has introduced a bill in the House, which I'm sure will go nowhere, but it's important symbolically, which would bring the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank under the Treasury Department and to make it start issuing money in order to put people to work to build infrastructure
As an interesting side note, the Federal Reserve 100-year contract of exclusive central bank status is up next year in 2012, a year that's much politicized for a lot of reasons, be it the Mayan calendar or the presidential election. So
there'd have to be new legislation to keep it going?
Well, it's probably something that will just be turned over and signed and just renewed, without question at all. I mean, who else is going to lobby to be the new central bank? But that does leave open the possibility for popular opinion between now and next year, December 31st, 2012, to get this overturned so that if the contract is not renewed, but just flat out, with legislation, we can nationalize that bank. Right. At any time, we can just bring it under the Treasury's control and begin printing money debt-free without owing interest back to the private bankers. And this is really key for people to understand, and it's one of the main issues that we have, this extensive, never-ending war.
Why do we pay for this? Before the show, Bob of the staff here gave us Susan B. Anthony dollar. And this is debt-free money. Our Congress made this money without borrowing from anybody, without paying interest on it. And there's no reason in the world why the United States government cannot borrow money debt-free, make its own money debt-free. That was a prerogative of government down through the ages until the establishment of the Bank of England, and of course in the United States in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act.
And this definitely ties in really importantly to the Occupy Wall Street movement. We were talking on the way up here, I think that they're missing the mark. They should be occupying the Federal Reserve. You made the point of saying that the street's too narrow. I think that's a minor point. The whole point of occupying the source of all this tyranny is really the root cause, not necessarily the Wall Street bankers who are making their percentage points. Yes, they seem rich to the unemployed college student who's paying hand over fist to cover their interest rates, but the root cause of all these problems is the Federal Reserve.
Absolutely, absolutely. And people need to understand the money system. Amschel Rothschild said, give me control of the money system. I don't care who makes the laws. That's what's important. And people need to understand that the Federal Reserve is central to the corporate control of our government.
Bob, you have a question?
There is a clause, a section in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that allows for Congress to dissolve the Federal Reserve Bank and bring all of its assets back into the U.S. Treasury. If I'm not mistaken, the single largest asset that the Federal Reserve Bank has is the debt owed to it by the U.S. Treasury.
Yes, it's basically every dollar that's ever been printed.
Yep. Our money system is based upon that debt.
Yep.
And that clause should be taken advantage of. But anytime there's any kind of threat to audit the Federal Reserve, we saw this when Ron Paul first introduced the Audit the Federal Reserve Act, which was then gutted, but still did have some teeth left. But it was really just the 2 front teeth. It really wanted to go in there and just look at everything, but they threatened that if you look at our books, we'll crash the markets. They didn't say we'll crash the markets, they said the markets will crash. Because
every time that they say, oh, we don't want to really get, people say we don't want to get involved, let the Federal Reserve do what it's doing. The mission statement of the Federal Reserve is stability. among other things. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, look at
Yeah,
the
and
record.
we've
Look
had
at the
nothing but
record.
crashes.
We've had like 7 recessions since 1913.
But you know,
it's been a disaster.
somebody might say that, you know, if you keep on doing something, it may be the purpose. You know, there's something called the business cycle, which is around 7 years, but that cycle may be created. You know, somebody might say that war may be part of the goal that the powers that be, that our leaders really want. If they really wanted peace, they would do something about it. I mean, if peace broke out tomorrow, basically, what you'd want to do is go out, get a margin account in your brokerage account and sell short Halliburton and all the defense companies. You want to sell them short, right? Because war is good. A lot of money has been made in wars, right? But the Federal Reserve, I mean, what is the Federal Reserve? What purpose? I mean, why can't we stop the Federal Reserve from doing what it's doing? Perry was the only one person that said that Bernanke is guilty of treason. What do you think about that?
Yeah, but the only problem is that Perry doesn't know what he's talking about. Perry is right in what he's saying, but all he's doing is parroting a line from Ron Paul because he's trying to co-opt that movement of the anti-Fed, pro-liberty movement. Now, this is something I know a lot about because, you know, I personally support Ron Paul, and I don't support him because I'm a Republican or anything like this. I support him because he's the only person that actually says what I believe and I think and feel.
Now, how
it makes sense to me.
Now, how do you do that as a Democrat? How do you support Ron Paul? Because people will say, "Oh, well, you know, how could you do that?" And you know,
Paul's a libertarian.
He also believes in that. As a Democrat, how do you feel supporting?
It really doesn't matter what the label is. Dennis Kucinich says many of the same things as Ron Paul.
I think I would call myself a Kennedy Democrat, but he was opposed to the Federal Reserve too, and he was issuing silver money.
Yep. Executive Order 11110.
Now, the main issue is just that we have to get to the root of the cause. And before we can even discuss the nuances of all the points between Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, all these different things, we have to get our freedom back, our freedom of speech, and the freedom of our property, and the contracts to be enforced instead of having bailouts to these giant banks because they're breaking contracts left and right.
That's right. The whole left-right dichotomy is really distracting us because it's the issue really in America today is the people versus the corporate control of our government. Exactly. And the people on Occupy Wall Street have to keep their eye on the ball. End the war, close the Federal Reserve, and embark on a massive... Or nationalize it, and embark on a massive infrastructure program to create good-paying jobs and to make this country more competitive. Exactly. They've got to focus.
And that's what they should say. You know, some people criticize the Occupy Wall Street group because they're not as focused enough. I think they are. It may be an attempt to paint them as a very vague group. Obviously, too big to fail. You know, these banks, they'll do anything they can to bail them out. And if you think times are bad now, it could get a lot worse. But our top story really is Syria. At the United Nations right now, they're writing a bill that would basically allow the United States to drop bombs or invade Syria through the guise of NATO. Do you believe that will go through? Marchand.
I think most likely it'll go through. I mean, the same way the plan to bomb Libya, the resolution to bomb Libya went through.
Gus, we're just coming to the end of the show. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Gus, you can talk all night.
Gus?
I think it possibly will, but it'd probably be on the effect of what happened in Libya.
So you think the same thing?
Instead of total domination, you know, I think it'll be something where it's subversive behind the scenes.
Okay.
I agree with Gus. It's going to be a different tactic. It'll be more on the ground. And Turkey's a key player here. Turkey, for its own reasons, may want Assad out.
Well, that's the problem. There must be some playing in there that we don't know about. I want to thank you for being on the show, guys.
Thanks, Rob.
Our guests are
Rob.
They're from the WPKN show In Context. See you next time. Thank you for joining us right here on Bridgeport Now.